Anakin Skywalker, meet Obi-Wan Kenobi.
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them!
Obi-Wan had chosen not to dress him in a new tunic, but to allow those at the funeral to see the burned mark where the Sith Lord's lightsaber had pierced him through. It was the only hint of the violence of Qui-Gon's death.
That clip comes from Master and Apprentice, which was referenced a lot in Part 1, and covers the early part of his life, while the incredible audiobook Kenobi is also a must-read if you're watching a video like this, covering all kinds of details in his later life post-Clone Wars, and will be a great way to add context to the new Kenobi series. And you can get one of these books for free thanks to our sponsor, Audible. Sign up today to receive 1 month free, giving you access to their entire Plus catalog, containing everything from podcasts, fitness, meditation, and sleep aids, on top of their library of thousands of audiobooks. I think these audiobook versions are the best versions of these stories, as the sound effects, subtle music, and outstanding narration really put you in a galaxy far, far away. If you love it as much as I do and stay on after your free trial, you will get 1 credit every month to apply to any audiobook you want, and those credits roll over each month so you never lose them. If you cancel, you still keep all of your credits and can still spend them whenever you wish, as well as having access to all the audiobooks in your library forever. Some of the highest rated Star Wars content is waiting for you down in the link below. Visit audible.com/metanerds or text metanerds to 500-500 for 1 free audiobook and a 30-day free trial. What's up, Meta-Nerds? In Part 1, we followed Kenobi's life from almost being overlooked at birth, his difficult relationship with his master Qui-Gon, nearly dumped off to a new master at 17, older than perhaps any Padawan in history, jaded and confused by his lack of advanced saber training, but in his mission to Bajal he would feel a deeper connection to the Force, and come to understand his master, and even respecting the ancient mystical prophecies. When Jin rejected the offer to join the High Council, and asked Obi-Wan if he wanted to remain as his Padawan, he felt like all these difficulties in the Force had placed him with the right master after all. From then on out, these two worked as one of the greatest pairs in the Jedi Order, with the next major mission taking them to the forest world of Brienne. Kenobi would remain in the ship, monitoring the area, and providing a quick evac when Jin found the Princess of the Wood, known as Mistress the Heir. The problem was the Metal Clan found them too, a group of deadly mercenary fighters that hoped to force her to grant them the right to cut down the forest and sell it all to some off-world entity. As they were surrounded, and the leader boasted that she would either give the word to destroy the forest, or her blood would be spilled to grant them the right. Kenobi buzzed in as he piloted the Edda-class shuttle right into the perfect position for Qui-Gon to make a Force-assisted jump to safety. The Padawan set the course for Coruscant, while the priestess was livid, screaming at Qui-Gon that he should have killed these blasphemers, but he assured her that, without her, the Metal Clan would have no way to move forward with their plan. Kenobi just listens as she rails against the Jedi Order, saying they must be cowards, not the great warriors she heard legends of. Once they sat down in the safe harbor of the Jedi Temple, she was given quarters, while Kenobi went off to file a thorough report. And Qui-Gon spoke with Yoda about how troubled he was by the Jedi's reputation, that almost everyone in the galaxy saw them simply as warriors. And even here on Coruscant, the Order's home, people just saw them as another branch of government, protectors of politicians and the Republic's interests. He feared even the Jedi themselves were not sure of their true role in the galaxy. But Yoda believed that leaving Coruscant was impossible, and his only advice was to meditate on the Force. To do this, Jin would leave their metal-covered world and traveled to a random coordinate, finding a lush planet with an obscure and organic side rich in the dark side of the Force. He sits upon a throne of vines and hopes to connect with the living Force. In a vision, he seems to fight evil beings, but once they lay dead, he sees they were Jedi. When he jolts awake, he thinks the interpretation is a Jedi will seek to purge evil, but end up killing their own. Around 35 BBY, they would rendezvous with Yoda on the planet Bontor, which was a base for the Fleshmonger pirate group, who hoped to sell off a Force-sensitive child to the highest bidder. An insight into how people both didn't fully understand the group, as they called anyone with Force powers a Jedi, like this undiscovered child. And there are often scenes of selling off a Jedi or perceived Jedi being a major underworld event, as some would hope to train them into weapons, while others simply hope to torture and kill them out of a twisted sense of payback for all those problems the Force police had given them over the years. Yoda had taken out the entire room, and Kenobi is dumbstruck at the little ancient master's power. He'd heard about it plenty, but to see a pirate base decimated in person was impactful. By the year 32 BBY, Kenobi was elated knowing that his knighthood would be coming soon. At 25, it would be older than most, but his journey with his unique master, the only one he knew besides the fallen Jedi Dooku who still believed in the mystic ancient ways of the Force, was of course going to be a bit unorthodox. He knew that if this path was slower, it had truly led him to be more well-rounded and thoroughly connected to the will of the Force. After all the petty fights, he couldn't wait for the moment when Qui-Gon would conduct the ceremony and tell him to rise out of Padawan and stand proud as a Jedi Knight. But before this, they had to respond to a trade dispute on the obscure world of Naboo. A tedious mission sure to be packed full of boring waiting around and incredibly long negotiations. After reading up on tons of political documents to try and unravel the web of contracts with the Trade Federation and the royalty of Naboo, they came racing into the system on the Radiant 7, a consular-class cruiser, and set a course for the Lucrehulk cargo freighter called the Saak, the flagship of this legally disputed blockade. As they set down, the robe negotiators make their way through a hangar full of battle droids and starfighters, which is a growing phenomenon of this decade, where increased piracy and expansion called for private companies to be granted ever-increasing means of defense. Policies that led to organizations like the Trade Federation to have essentially the largest standing army in the galaxy. Once in the meeting room, Kenobi says he is picking up on some sort of phantom menace lurking beneath the superficial aspects of this mission.
But something elsewhere.
Be mindful of the living force, young Padawan.
Yes, Master.
Where the cosmic force could be compared to the will of and structure of the universe, the living force was generated by living beings, connected to the effects of their will and sentience. As they stare out of the transparent steel window, Kenobi is surprised to hear that Jin thinks this will go quickly, as the Neimoidians are afraid of conflict and seek to keep talks with authorities as short as possible. When Darth Sidious contacts Nute Gunray and orders them to launch the invasion of Naboo and kill the Jedi, Jin senses the sharp increase in fear from their hosts, and Kenobi realizes they are taking far too long to greet them. As soon as the secret Sith Lord ends transmission, the hangar cannons turn on the cruiser and deliver all aboard a quick, fiery death, while the Jedi spring into action. As a green gas pumps into the room, Jin calmly identifies it as the deadly gas Dioxis. This is what the battle meditations trained them for, and simply by holding their breath and calming their bodies, they were able to wait until the Neimoidians felt sure the negotiators were dead. When the B-1s cautiously approach, blue and green sabers ignite, and Kenobi leaps forward as this deadly pair deflects bolts and splits the squad before separating heads from droid bodies, and smashing some to the floor with a forced push, before racing through the ship, slashing their way to the command room. Nute was nervous and desperately called for the droideka units, while Jin was hoping to melt through the blast doors, with Kenobi providing perfect cover. No words spoken as they worked in perfect synchrony, a long way from those days on Teth where misunderstandings almost got them killed. As soon as Kenobi saw the pair of droidekas rolling up, he shouts to his master knowing these could not be taken alone, and with shields activated and 4 pairs of blaster cannons ripping through the hull, the master knew they had to flee, using a force-powered sprint to get away and into another hangar area. Putting their duty before their own lives, the master says to his apprentice that they should split up and stow away onto separate ships. And even in the face of losing the person closest to him, Kenobi shows his confidence and peace with the will of the Force through his witty sense of humor.
You were right about one thing, Master. The negotiations were short.
By the time the massive C-9979 landing crafts descended on Naboo, unleashing their AAT tanks and MTT troop carriers, STAP speeders, and the smaller PAC carriers, the Neimoidian leadership makes a frantic call to the droid commander as they realize the Jedi were nowhere to be found on the Lucrehulk. And as they flee through the dense jungle, Jin rushes to save a clueless local that happened to be in the right place to intercept these pivotal Force sensitives. Kenobi regroups with 2 speeders firing on him, but his master makes quick work of them, and this Gungan says his name is Jar Jar Binks, and that the safest place they could go would be the underwater city of Otoh. But this outcast has second thoughts, prompting the Jedi to play a little bad cop, and scare him into complying.
If they find us, they will crush us, grind us into tiny pieces, and blast us into oblivion.
Kenobi shows they must have played in this gray area of Jedi tactics for a while, executing it flawlessly and in sync, a long way from the uptight, rules and regulations obsessed teenager years ago. Once they reach Lake Poanga, they don rebreathers and descend into the city. Passing through the force field, they may have been the first off-worlders to ever set foot in this majestic place. And in the throne room, Boss Nass tries to send them off quickly and explains Jar Jar will be punished for returning. But again, with some gray area use of the Force, the Master manipulates his mind and secures them a transport. And as they leave, he listens to Jar Jar's plea, knowing he was only there because these two Jedi pushed him. But still, Kenobi is more hesitant and focused on getting in touch with the Council as quickly as possible. But his master was always finding ways to help those along the way, even finding a way to fit them into the mission as a whole. With their tri-bubble bongo, they set out through the water core of Naboo, quick to be picked up by an OPC killer, but Jin is confident in one of the most universal laws.
Always a bigger fish.
With the assistance of a Sando Aqua monster, they make it further, only to run out of power, though Kenobi's confidence with all things mechanical helped them to quickly get on their way, dodging Kolo Clawfish and the insatiable Sando. While Queen Padme Amidala was watching the droid army easily sack Theed, the Gungan ship finally pops out in the beautiful canals of the capital, with droid escorts moving the Queen and her attendants to a more secure camp. The Jedi pounce, and within a few seconds these synchronous warriors slash their way through the servos and circuits and rush them back into the palace. Though he was uneasy with the Jedi's role in galactic politics, these decades of experience in this role did give him an understanding that this move by the Trade Federation made no sense with the known facts. That something darker was pulling the strings here, and urges the Queen that the only way to protect her people is to abandon them, however difficult that may seem. Casually walking into the hangar, Kenobi makes his way to the captured pilots, while Jin stalls at the J-Type 327 Nubian before being forced to use his blade. With a flurry of attacks and saber strikes, they rush the pilots into the ship and race out of the hangar, off of Theed and straight into the Federation blockade, with more than a dozen Lucre Hulks bearing down on them. When the shield generator is hit, the R2 astromech units spring into action, Kenobi watching on helplessly through a monitor as several are blasted into space dust. This would be the first of many times that Kenobi would end up relying on R2-D2 to defy all odds and save the day. As they push past the fleet, alerts ring out that their hyperfuel is leaking, and Jin knows they can't run for long. Kenobi was already looking up nearby worlds free of the Trade Federation influence, and identifies a suitable sandy harbor.
Here, Master. Tatooine.
Kenobi is checking to see if there were any repairs he could do in the meantime, and we see that they could both sense the mysterious dark presence behind these events.
Be wary. I sense a disturbance in the Force.
I feel it also, Master.
Setting down on the outskirts, Kenobi would remain in the ship to protect the group, while Jin headed out in search of parts to repair the ship. Here he would meet the greedy shopkeeper Watto, and a human boy named Anakin, who, as the Force would have it, would later come to Jar Jar's rescue, preventing a street fight, and urge them to take shelter in his mother's home as a powerful sandstorm was approaching. Back in the Nubian starship, Kenobi shouts down a holo message sent to the Queen, pleading for her to get in contact with them. And though he was sure initially that it was a trick by the Federation, the Padawan contacts Jin to see what he thought. Then the Master assures him that getting to Coruscant was their only hope. When he talks with Shmi, she timidly makes a statement that would change galactic history, something down to the very nature of the Force itself. When she says that Anakin had no father, Jin was instantly sent back to his earliest years as an apprentice to Count Dooku, back when he believed the ancient Jedi mystics' prophecies were true, and though he later came to think they were just wisdom and archetypal stories, only since that mission on Pijal did he come to again believe that they were true, and that they were living in the time of prophecy. All those decades of study, the line that Kenobi once called nonsense, that a, quote, chosen one shall come, born of no father, and through him will ultimate balance in the Force be restored. This all rushed back into Jin's mind, a lifetime with these cryptic prophecies, and here he was confronted with the words being made flesh in this boy, picked up on accident in the most unlikely of places. To be sure, Qui-Gon sends a blood sample to Kenobi to analyze.
Over 20,000.
Even Master Yoda doesn't have a midichlorian count that high.
No Jedi has.
While Kenobi was guarding the ship, his master was out there trying to stay calm and let the Force guide his every move. Knowing the situation seemed impossible, with a human boy, the only one of his species to ever try the pod races, the boy that never even finished a race before, Jin would show his full faith in the Force, betting everything on this outcome that would bring the boy into the Jedi Order. This gamble also got them the parts for the Queen's ship, and while the attendants are loading up everything and making the repairs, Kenobi is eager to rejoin his master, and unknowingly jokes about the chosen one of prophecy.
Why do I sense we've picked up another pathetic life form?
Though the boy struggled through the emotions of excitement, fear, and deep sadness, as he realized he might never see his mother again, Anakin would choose the path of a Jedi, and as if to reinforce Jin's certainty in the boy's true importance, this child who had only taken his first steps into a larger world of the Jedi would be attacked by a Sith, something no living Jedi had ever seen. As the black-robed Zabrak engaged Jin, the Master knew he was in a fight of prophetic importance. A Sith-bled crystal powered the Crimson Blade, just like the visions from years earlier. As terrifying as this could be, it was also proof that he should not worry, as this was proof of the will of the Force playing out. He needed only to let it flow through him. Kenobi was moving the ship into position for his master to make a jump to safety, and as he caught his breath, a casual introduction would bring Obi-Wan into the story of ultimate importance.
Anakin Skywalker, meet Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Hi.
But for now, they had to stay focused on their mission of bringing the Queen to Coruscant, paradox of a Jedi's existence, as Jin believed this mission was something the Jedi should never have been involved in. Instead, they should be focusing on understanding the prophecies and finding those it spoke of. And yet it was this messy political drama on an obscure world that brought him into contact with the Chosen One. As Jin speaks with the Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum about going to the Jedi High Council, he sees that even though he didn't mention Anakin, the boy detects Jin's thoughts, though he signals to go off with the Queen's entourage. While Master and Apprentice went before the most esteemed Jedi in the entire galaxy, disagreement over the prophecies was a major reason for Jin turning down the offer to join the council. His superiors dismissed this odd and dangerous fascination, and while Kenobi was always unsure, he had to sit here in awe of the facts. A boy with the highest midichlorian count in history, and the first attack by an agent of the darkness. And with Mace Windu's terse dismissal, the ever-respectful Kenobi bows and leaves, only to see his master present his greatest concern.
I have encountered divergence in the Force.
A virgins, you say?
Located around a person?
A boy.
And Yoda, who was one of the few to not vote in favor of Jin joining the council, who made a point of telling him this years earlier, while always trying to rein in Jin's fascination with the esoteric and lofty, unscalable goals for galactic ruling bodies. Yoda is quick to make Jin state plainly what he is asking.
Oh. Trained as a Jedi, you request for him,
On the Senate floor, the Queen would receive friendly advice from the elder friend and senator from Naboo, Sheev Palpatine, who coached her into the vote of no confidence that would force the immediate vote for a replacement. As the sun set on the Jedi, Kenobi pleads with his master to think about the practical side of it.
He's too old.
Anakin will become a Jedi, I promise you.
Kenobi himself was one of the oldest, at 3 years, and he and Jin saw firsthand with Rael Averross, the oldest Jedi to join at 5 years old, that he never fully fit into the Order, and would eventually join Dooku in walking away from the Jedi path. Though Jin is certain Anakin will be a Jedi, and will go against the Council's will if need be, Jin knew that Kenobi would eventually see that the Order was deeply flawed, and had forgotten that the Council was a body to understand and serve the will of the Force, but had grown arrogant and confused, placing their own traditions and interpretations above the living voice of the Force itself. Later that night, the debate over the boy continues.
He is to be trained then?
No, he will not be trained.
He is the chosen one. You must see it.
Clouded this boy's future is.
And the man that once feared that his master saw him as a failure, hears Jin make the case for his Padawan's promotion.
He is headstrong, and he has much to learn of the living Force, but he is capable. There is little more he can learn from me.
But this council worried that these were the least of their problems. They needed to focus on the election of the new chancellor, try to calm the rising tensions with the powerful Trade Federation, and most of all, hunt down this new Sith. And after they leave, Kenobi pushes his master, pleading with him to see the darkness that was surrounding Anakin, frustrating Jin and forcing him to make sure his Padawan still understood his place.
He's not dangerous. The Council will decide Anakin's future. That should be enough for you. Now get on board.
Once they land on Naboo, Kenobi had to admit that he was in awe of his master's strategy. Seemingly random and weak strangers like the Gungan and Slave Boy ended up being very important people. Jin's act of kindness towards Jar Jar would now pay them back by leading them to the Gungan Holy Retreat, and he knew his master would not casually put forth the claim of the Chosen One. He knew this was just his old cautious and order-loving side pushing back against this wild series of events.
I'm sorry for my behavior, Master. It's not my place to disagree with you about the boy. And I am grateful you think I'm ready to take the trials.
They had come a long way over their 13 years of apprenticeship, and deep down he knew that this was a complex form of fear to deny the obvious signs that he was living out prophecy. When they arrived at the Gungan Holy Retreat, and saw the true Queen Padme Amidala reveal herself in a clever play to overcome the long-standing hatred between her people and the Swamp Dwellers, the Jedi can't help but smile. When the Gungans organize their forces, Padme explains the plan that she and her advisors devised. Kenobi makes sure to point out that they need to capture Nute Gunray alive and keep him as a bargaining tool, otherwise the Federation would simply commit a seemingly endless supply of droid reinforcements. When all the pieces were in position, the massive Gungan force in the fields outside the capital city of Theed would be met by AATs, while the smaller Jedi-assisted group made its way into the palace. It quickly captured the hangar, allowing the N1 fighters to launch their attack on the droid control ship in orbit. All was going according to plan, and the next stop was the palace hangar. Ordering Anakin to stay in the cockpit of an N1, they moved with the Queen, only to be met by the Phantom Menace. Any doubts about this attacker disappeared as the black robes were pulled back to reveal the Horned Sith Lord. Exuding dark side power, he ignited a double-bladed red lightsaber. This ancient enemy of the Order, an embodiment of evil incarnate, stood before him. But Kenobi was not paralyzed with fear. Trusting in his master's training and their bond, he initiates the attack by leaping over Darth Maul, the Padawan that had once been out of sync with his master, to the point that both him and Jin felt that they might split ways, who had yelled at his master nearly a decade earlier, asking why he was only being trained in lightsaber fundamentals. Kenobi seeing this as proof that his master saw no potential in him, only to realize that Jin did this to ensure his defenses would be unstoppable, that almost all Jedi died by straying away from the simple and effective strikes. Now these two fought in perfect harmony. And while R2 made sure to get Anakin into the fight, Kenobi was by his master's side, letting the Force flow through him, keeping the weapon forged in the dark side that was this red-skinned Zabrak at bay. When the Sith tried to separate them, Kenobi was confident and skilled enough to close the gap and keep him engaged. Jin doing the same as they pursued Maul into the plasma power generator room. This Sith had been forged by Darth Sidious into a living weapon from childhood. His one purpose was to hunt and kill, and he had thoroughly studied the terrain for this Jedi hunt. Hoping to use the catwalks to separate them, the athleticism of this Sith and his unique blade allowed him to block and deliver a kick that sends Kenobi flying over the edge. Jin knows he cannot let the Sith Lord escape, and keeps the red blades engaged as Maul slowly leads him away. Kenobi had recovered and sprinted to his master, only to be cut off by a series of 6 laser grid panels. Even though this is perfect at separating the Jedi, Maul does seem shocked by the security measure, one which was modeled on the old Naboo Legends of Chaos being sealed behind 6 gates. From an engineering level, it was put in place to stop fluctuations from escaping the plasma generator room. If Maul was looking at the layout, he may not have realized this function. It's important to understand that this was not a timed or regular opening and closing. It was unpredictable and random, as it was responding to fluctuations in the plasma mining process. There's no way any of them could have understood this in the moment, but the fact that these doors open and shut in such perfect intervals to keep Kenobi separated is one of the most subtle and yet profound examples of the way that the Force truly binds everything. To make things worse, the Gungan army was on the verge of defeat. The Queen's strike team had been captured, while Anakin made a crash landing inside of the Lucre Hulk. Though the gates opened, they shut down again just in time to keep him isolated, and Maul uses the advantage of his unique saber style perfectly. It's likely that Jin had never sparred against a double-bladed saber for any notable length of time. Only the temple guards had them, and outside of Pong Krell, there's no notable Jedi of this era that use one. Since the time of the ancient Sith under Bane, it was known that the double blade had its own difficulties, but the unconventional angles of attack and options made up for it if you could master it. Kenobi was helplessly looking on as Maul moved a block into a blow to Jin's face, stunning him for a split second long enough to spin and use the lower blade to deliver the mortal wound. And the Sith savored the moment, pivoting immediately to stare into the Padawan's eyes, as he watched his beloved master and closest friend drop to the floor. Rage did flow through Kenobi as he watched Jin's eyes close and jostling in death throes. Instead of the conservative style, Kenobi is bouncing up in pent-up anger, sprinting out to engage as soon as the doors open. A flurry of blows, still solid fundamentals, that kept the red blades at bay, forcing Maul to break contact, re-engage and get the Padawan leaping, and to call deeply on the Force to dodge and deliver precise strikes. Seeing an opening to level the playing field and chop that Sith blade in half, right into a kick to drop him, and wasting no time following up with another jump over Maul. Though deflected, the Sith was on the run, and Kenobi hoped to push an opening. But the Zabrak was quick to recover and now had stripped Obi-Wan of his momentum, turning a head kick into an intense saber lock, setting up for a high saber guard, and knowing Kenobi was overconfident in removing the threat of that second blade, a burst of force push sends the Padawan into the pit. And now Maul was sure that after all these years in an apprenticeship to the hidden Sith Master, he would have his second Jedi kill in just a few seconds. With a callous kick of the honored weapon off the side, Kenobi was in a position that many would have felt completely overwhelmed. But he knew that this was a moment of prophecy, and that he had been trained by perhaps the greatest active Jedi of this era. His only move was something that would test his confidence, connection with the Force, and bond with his master. As Maul taunted, Kenobi let the Force flow through him, and in his oneness with it, he regained the high ground, pulled Jin's blade into his hand, and cut down the stunned Sith Lord, staring into its horrifying yellow eyes and watching as he disappeared into the pit. And you can hear the panic and sadness in the Padawan's voice as he rushes to his master.
No! Promise me you will train the boy.
Yes, Master.
Overhead, the Chosen One had just done the impossible, single-handedly destroying a Lucrehulk, the droid control ship for the invasion force, saving the Gungans and Queen, and forever changing the way battle droids were designed. Later, Kenobi and Anakin would bow to greet the newly elected Supreme Chancellor and Naboo native Sheev Palpatine.
We are indebted to you for your bravery, Obi-Wan Kenobi. We will watch your career with great interest.
And in the palace, Kenobi would find himself in a position he thought not even these old mystics could have foreseen.
Agree with your taking this boy as your Padawan learner? I do not.
Once he went behind Jin's back to ask for the Council's intervention in reining in his master. Now he was willing to be kicked out of the Order to fulfill his master's wishes.
I will train Anakin, without the approval of the Council if I must.
Qui-Gon's defiance I sense in you.
The next morning he would undergo a rush knighting ceremony, a moment he had looked forward to his entire life, as one to be filled with pride and joy, was subdued and heavy with darkness. He remembered how he reacted to his master's offer to the Council, that it left him feeling discarded, the oldest Padawan ever, and now to be thoughtlessly dumped onto another, a time when he wasn't as close to Jin, all feelings which now felt ancient and alien. Now as night came, they would gather for the funeral of a Jedi Master killed in combat with a Sith Lord. None of that made sense to the 25-year-old who within 24 hours found himself without the man who guided him for over a decade, propelled into the title of Knight, and now perhaps the youngest to also be a Master to a Padawan, a boy that Jin was convinced would become the most important being in galactic history. It was all moving too fast, and only now in the calm of the cool Naboo night could he stop and finally process it all. In the shrine where his master's body had been laid out, he stared into the only father figure he'd ever known, and the Queen came to visit and give him her condolences.
Are you ready? Am I ready to see my master consumed by the flames? To know I will never see him again? Give me one more moment.
With his final goodbye before the funeral began, his last words were a reference to Jin's own when Kenobi had questioned him on how he could be so sure about those ancient prophecies.
Looking at Qui-Gon's face for the last time, Obi-Wan whispered, I choose to believe.
Council have granted me permission to train you. You will be a Jedi.
For the next 3 years, as Kenobi matured into his role of master, he started to look like his old master, growing out his hair more and sporting a full beard. And like Qui-Gon, he tried to instill in Anakin a respect and mastery of meditation. Within the Jedi Temple, the 12-year-old Chosen One was constantly surprising Obi-Wan with his control of the Force, even if off-task, and more interested in impressive feats than deeper understanding. He thought about how he had always pictured going to Jin for advice when he finally did become a master of his own, and he needed help now, as he was detecting some unease in the Force. Master Tosan would interrupt their meditation with an assignment from the Council, a mission to recover an ancient Jedi holocron on the mid-rim planet of Dalinor. Anakin was frustrated to have to go back to training with the little kids. He was at their level in terms of time at the temple, but everyone knew he was much further along. He would tell the boy that accepting frustrating rules was actually a major Jedi lesson, before he went off to the archives to do his typical deep research. Yoda meets him to explain the importance of this is that any records of a Jedi presence on this world was lost to time. And surprisingly, the one that was so against Anakin's apprenticeship actually pushes for Kenobi to take him along. While the boy was in a room full of kids half his age, Kenobi is blunt enough to point out Yoda's surprising turn. And the little green wise man says that if he wishes to train him, he must train him well. Yoda always knew Anakin could very well be the Chosen One, and a half-hearted training would be the worst outcome of all. This would be their first mission, and even the first time he was in space since arriving on Coruscant. It was nice that the boy shared his own mechanical side and love of piloting that he too had years earlier. And Kenobi thinks to himself that he really can't just try to duplicate his training with this older Padawan, who might have been incarnated by the Force. If it wasn't for the uncertainty of the prophecies, the unfathomably high stakes might have been too much for him. While in the blue expanse of hyperspace, Anakin asks him about his life before the temple, responding that he can't remember much, that he was trained in the same way he was over these past years. And perhaps unassuringly to the boy, he reminds him that he was still a Padawan when they met. Anakin feels an uncertainty about the Jedi path, and wonders if this is why the Council didn't want people that could remember their past. When Kenobi tries to say that the Council was sometimes wrong, that Qui-Gon picked Anakin, this troubled preteen brings up something that has always bothered him. That Kenobi was only training him because Jin died, always feeling that Kenobi was amongst those that would have denied him ever being a Jedi. Once they arrived, they were met by Clatriff, the head of the excavation team, who quickly expresses her hopes that they would take the artifact away, since it was beginning to attract pirates. And Anakin was excited to be given guard duty, while Kenobi was shown the holocron. And just as it touched his hand, the Padawan came screaming into the room that the pirates were back. Going to confront them, he makes his plea that the item is only of historic importance to the Order, and that they come in peace. That's symbolic of the Jedi's role in the galaxy. This is all said with his hand at the ready upon his lightsaber. After threat of violence, he ends up igniting the blue blade with a promise that they will defend themselves, which had the opposite of scaring the leader. Instead, he orders his thugs to bring him this exotic weapon. Their primitive vibroblades and non-existent martial arts pose no challenge to Obi-Wan, but these criminals knew their advantage always lay in playing their target's morality against them. One pounced on Anakin, who still did not have a blade of his own, and with sword to throat demands that the master trade the boy for the saber. But the Birdman was knocked out mid-sentence from a barrage of rocks to the back of the head, falling limp at Anakin's feet, who stood tall with clenched fist and a cloud of projectiles floating around him. Kenobi saying to the rest of the pilots that they should leave before Anakin continues his training. Turns out that practice at the Temple of Floating Rocks did have some real-world application. Once they were safe on their ship, Anakin apologized for being caught, saying he guesses he wasn't ready for an off-world mission after all. But Kenobi corrects him, saying that Anakin had been ready long before today, that he was the one with reservations, and to the boys' surprise, Obi-Wan says that he wasn't unsure about him, but himself. That if he failed his master during their fight with Maul, how could he be a good master of his own, and with such odd and difficult circumstances? The boy's confidence shot up, and he says they'll just have to save each other then, and Kenobi agrees that that is what Jin would have wanted. This would end up proving more true than either of them could understand at this time, and as he let Anakin pilot the ship back home, he thinks to himself something that Jin once thought about Obi in those difficult years before Pijal, when he wasn't sure if they should be paired together, but knew that this was the way a master continued their own learning and understanding of the Force. In his own teaching, he too would be taught. Soon after this, Obi-Wan made sure his Padawan would have a proper weapon for their next mission. He took Anakin to Ilum to acquire his Kyber Crystal, a hallowed tradition that would push him past his own personal flaws of fear and anger, returning to Coruscant with his newly crafted saber that emitted a brilliant blue blade like that of his master. First thing he wanted to do with it was confront the greatest fear and regret of Obi-Wan, showing his master that by training him, he could make right those failures on Naboo. Anakin was putting on a bit of a show, gathering a crowd around a training droid that he had customized to look like and even fight like Darth Maul. And either through the Force or through some conversation with the excited youth earlier, Senator Palpatine was there in person to watch this display. Getting on Mace Windu's nerves, they watched on as the hologram Sith ignited the double-bladed blue lightsaber, shocking Windu when he realized what the boy was fighting against. Kenobi explained that this was something of a secret project for Anakin, who had asked countless questions about Maul and his fight style, and while the Jedi were unnerved and unsure about what to make of this, Palpatine found it incredibly impressive. A sick perversion as he watched the last tool he had shaped to serve him until death be symbolically killed again by the young boy he hoped to corrupt to the dark side next. Some of the other jealous Padawans hoped to put him down by saying none of this meant he would be a good Jedi, that he was a slave to his emotions, taking joy in bringing up Anakin's past, emphasizing he's a slave. Anakin snapped, and in a split second the boys' blades were ripped from their belt, floated in front of their face, and the blades were ignited. Blue and green sabers just inches away from delivering death within the temple walls, while the Chosen One looked into their frightened eyes and asked what emotions they were feeling now. Obi-Wan jumped down to break it up, and immediately, as if breaking from some dark side-imposed trance, the Padawan apologizes and admits that he needs to control his emotions as he tenderly hands back their blades. Right on cue, Palpatine uses this to point out that the boy's training seems incomplete, and Obi-Wan may be struggling with this unique challenge. Windu assures him that Kenobi has it under control, but the Chancellor plays his political position, pressing that technically the Jedi defer to the Senate's interests, and he was the leader of the Senate, but also that he just felt an appreciation and sympathy for the heroic boy who saved Naboo. Windu knew that the Chancellor was only asking for permission for what he was clearly going to do with or without the High Council's blessing, and reluctantly he agrees. Palpatine's scheming over Kenobi's Padawan had begun years before this, however, and over the next decade plus of apprenticeship, Obi-Wan would notice the gradual rise in darkness within Anakin, never aware that since that day he cut down Maul, he had been instantly thrown into the ultimate battle with the embodiment of the dark side in Darth Sidious. This battle would be more subtle and come to define his entire life, as well as the fate of the galaxy, a story we will continue in part 3. If you made it this far, the best way to help me out is to hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe if you want to see more. Be sure to check out the links down below for discounts via affiliate links and other ways to support us. Special shout out to our $25 tier supporters, Bill Payne, Oscar Jones, and Renee Flores. But most important of all, remember, you'll never know what the dark side is plotting. You can only trust the Force and do the right thing. And the Force will be with you, always.